Welcome to the AirPod, a podcast about aviation careers. My name's Mitchell. Have you ever wondered what life is like as an international cargo pilot?
I get to live where I want to live. My quality of life is pretty high. I'm flying a big airplane for 8 days, and I get to come home and do my other passion, which is fly little airplanes for the rest of the month.
How do you get to and from work?
They have to buy us a business class ticket if we go international. So I could end up on a United business class lay flat bed over to Seoul, South Korea, which, hey, that's not so bad, right?
Today we talk with Austin, a 777 first officer flying freight across the Pacific. Austin's experience goes far beyond the cargo world, flying everything from World War II fighters.
Backside, I started pulling a little too hard, a little too quickly. Start sounding and shaking, and it'll just start dropping out from under you.
To corporate turboprops.
I have still not crossed the Atlantic Ocean in a 777, but I have in a King Air.
He has a side hustle as a designated pilot examiner, giving check rides to aspiring pilots.
You're the PIC, dude. You just passed your private pilot check ride. Like, make a decision.
What's the biggest mistake he sees?
Call it the $900 button, because if you don't press it, you're going to be spending another $900 to come back to do another check ride.
We had a lot to cover, so let's get right into it.
I guess I'll start off with where I was born and raised. I was born and raised here in Minot, North Dakota. Very rich aviation history in Minot. I don't come from a aviation family. I was actually the first pilot in the family. So there's a lot of things that I guess I have done, not to brag on myself a little bit here, but I guess would make some of the career choices and paths that I've gone down a little more impressive, I guess. To start it off, back in high school is where I actually learned how to fly between my junior and senior year high school. And the reason my brother and I wanted to learn how to fly was because we had aspirations to go to one of the service academies. And I didn't get into the service academies. My brother did.
Oh boy.
So that's kind of where this whole story begins. And because I didn't get in, I knew I wanted to fly, so I had to come up with a plan B, right? And I think most people hear about the traditional ways to get into aviation, which are the 141 schools, the colleges, whether it be UND, Embry-Riddle, ATP, I guess, Part 61 school, but big nationwide flight school like that. Some sort of structured program to get into the to the flying world. For me, my parents actually sat down with my high school aviation teacher at the time, Merrick Murphy, who is still teaching at the Minot High School here. And he told them that, hey, Austin can go learn how to fly at the airport up here. It's going to cost a fraction of what it's going to cost whether you go to ATP or UND Embry-Riddle. And thankfully, I was able to do it without any loans or student debt, which I guess for me was a huge leg up, huge advantage going into the real world. So I had gone to the Minot Aero Center up on North Hill here in Minot, and we started taking our flying lessons. And that's where I got my private between that junior, senior year of high school. After I graduated high school, we needed to figure out, again, maybe the most economical way to do things. And that led us talking to a few people, and we ended up buying into a group that had I think it's a 1977 Mooney M20J. Back when I learned to fly, we were still using the PTS, which is the practical test standards. Nowadays, it has all switched to the ACS, the Airman Certification Standards. And what was important back then is you had to take your commercial check ride in a complex aircraft. You couldn't just go get the 10 hours of flight time that was required and take the check ride into 172 like many people do today. So I really accredit that buying into that Mooney really jump-started my career because of the type of flight time that I was able to accumulate with the aircraft, and that being the complex time. I was able to do my instrument, commercial, and CFI in the aircraft, and getting 250 hours of complex aircraft time really opened the door when I became a flight instructor to get into the corporate flying, where I ended up flying a couple of different Cirruses, and then where we met flying the Piper Malibu Mirage. So that's kind of learning how to fly, I guess, in the first couple jobs I had, flying the Cirrus, flying the Mirage. I did, and I still instruct at the Minot Aero Center where I learned how to fly. Nowadays, My instruction career has taken me more to the advanced instruction, whether it be high performance or tail wheel stuff, or maybe you go out and buy an airplane and it's more of a oddball airplane that one of the lower time instructors can't get insured in. So that's kind of where I limit my instruction to nowadays, just because I am doing the pilot examiner stuff. I think I worked, let's see, I started at the Aero Center back in May of 20, I think it was May of 2018. So I instructed full time, flew the Cirruses, flew the Mirage. I ended up becoming a CSIP, which stands for a certified, no, what does it stand for? Cirrus Standardized Instructor Pilot. It's been a while since I've
Yeah,
actually done
sure.
that. Where I went down to Knoxville, Tennessee, to Cirrus's, I guess now is it really their headquarters, where I went through a week long course as an instructor, learning everything there was to know about a Cirrus, and then coming back home was able to train new Cirrus pilots per Cirrus's insurance approved course, and that really opened up a lot of doors for me in the way of networking, meeting a lot of people in the industry from all over the country. I ferried some airplanes, picked up some airplanes from down in Florida, brought them back home, taught the owners how to fly, and got even those owners into new Cirrus aircraft as they, hate to say, wore their old ones out, but they only had about 400 hours on them when they got rid of them.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, they like to upgrade to the new ones pretty often.
It's like a brand new pickup, right? Every
Yeah.
3 years, they're better off leasing them at this point. Um, so that Cirrus job, the different Cirrus jobs, led me into the corporate job that I ended up flying for around 5 years, which I'll expand on a little bit. Uh, it was a King Air 200, and the way I really got into it was I had taken the initiative at the flight school where I was instructing and flying these other smaller aircraft on corporate trips. I had taken the initiative to go out and get my excuse me, my multi-engine rating, where none of the other instructors had that rating yet. And obviously, King Air has 2 engines, so you need a multi-engine rating to fly that. So when the gentleman I ended up working for 5 years came knocking at the flight school door, and to the owner at the time, asking, "Hey, I need a pilot to fly my airplane. Who do you have?" It was even though I had no multi-engine time outside of my training time in the multi. I ended up getting the job because I was the only one actually on paper qualified to do it. So I started flying with the owner of the aircraft. The owner was a pilot in the King Air, which is how I ended up getting enough King Air time to ultimately solo the aircraft. Um, that trip, I think, took me about 200 hours in the airplane before insurance was like, "Hey, you're good to go." And a 2 week course down at Flight Safety in Wichita, Kansas, which for a 19-year-old was I couldn't even rent a car when I was down there. So I'm
Yeah.
Ubering like to and from the flight safety building. So that was a different experience. Um, and that rental car battle was a battle I fought until I was 25, and some FBOs wouldn't even let me take their crew car out to
Jeez.
lunch when I flew in places. So Uber Eats and Grubhub were my friend for a little while there.
That's a tough life.
Hey, you're telling me. That King Air really opened my eyes to the world. We ended up going to 48 states with that airplane.
Wow.
Yeah, we used it. It was for business and a little bit of pleasure. The two states that I'm missing in that airplane were Hawaii. King Air can't quite make it to Hawaii without some extra fuel tanks in the back,
Of course.
and South Carolina. I don't know why South Carolina didn't make the list, but it still remains a state that I have not been to, and I have never made it there in the King Air. Although more amazingly, the King Air, we made it to 48 U.S. states. We made it to the Bahamas. We made it to Canada a few times. Made it to Greenland, to Iceland. Landed in the Netherlands at Amsterdam, the big airport, Schiphol. Um,
Oh my goodness. That's a haul.
it was, to expand on that trip a little bit, I guess, there's a company out there called Air Journey that puts on this, call it a guided tour in your own personal airplane.
Hmm.
Obviously, pretty serious airplanes. We were in a King Air. I think there was a TBM 930 on the trip. There was a Citation S2, a straight CJ, and a CJ3. So 5 airplanes, and I think there were 6 owner-operator couples that went on the trip, and then there was myself and my buddy Joe, who's also a pilot. We were flying the King Air, and then the Eric, which he was the Air Journeys employee, but he was flying a Global 7500 out of Hong Kong for a guy. So he was our tour guide, our experienced international pilot. This was really my first time flying international, so it was fun to have somebody there who actually knew what they were doing.
Mm-hmm.
um, so we ended up going kind of low and slow, the North Atlantic route. And we went from Bangor, Maine to Goose Bay, Canada. And we could have non-stopped Reykjavik, Iceland from there. But we're like, hey, man, we're this far north. We got to stop at Greenland. So I'm going to butcher this name, but we landed in, I think it was called Narsarsuaq, Greenland. And then we went to Reykjavik from there. We ended up spending a couple days in Reykjavik, and I think everybody on the trip was like, "Hey, we could have spent 2 weeks here." The the girls over there are very pretty,
Yeah.
blonde hair, blue eyes. The food was amazing. The weather for myself, who I live in North Dakota, it's like perfect fall and springtime weather year round there, basically. And then we went on to Amsterdam, and then we flew around Europe for 3 weeks, all over France and Spain. Made it over to Milan, Italy, to the Milano airport. We did a river or a boat tour on the Lake Como where Star Wars was filmed, so that was cool. Not only being able to see it, but see it from the water. My buddy and I, we had a little bit of time off while we were over there, so we ended up renting a car and driving 8 hours to Rome. Um, Not to bring religion into it, but I'm Catholic, and it was fun to see the Vatican City for the first time via a private aircraft, essentially.
Yeah. Very cool.
What's really interesting about that whole trip is that was my first time to Europe. It's been my only time to Europe. And even though today I fly a 777, I have still not crossed the Atlantic Ocean in a 777, but I have in a King Air. So interesting fact, but most of our Europe trips these days go pretty senior at the airline. So
Yeah, I bet not many people can say that they've done it in a King Air, but not a 777 if they fly one.
it's funny. I tell most of the captains I fly with these days, I tell them that story, and they're like, there's no way." um, So I'll segue that. I'm gonna have to circle back a little bit here in a little bit, and we'll come back to my own airplanes that I own. But for the time being, I'll keep going on the career path. So after I flew the King Air, I think I got a couple thousand hours in the King Air. It was all single pilot time. Um, I wanted to fly something higher, farther, faster. Didn't quite know what I wanted to do. I would have liked to stay in the corporate industry, but I have one thing that's really holding me back, which is I live in Minot, North Dakota, and unfortunately, there's there's nobody flying a Gulfstream out of Minot.
Right.
So even though I'm qualified and I'd love to fly one, I can't afford one, and I won't say there's not people in town that could afford one, but nobody has one. So I pretty much I had to either go to a fractional jet ownership like NetJets or FlexJet or VistaJet, or go to the airlines. And one of the things that I really didn't want to do in my career is, I'm not going to count it out ever, but as of today, I don't would not like to do this where you go fly for Delta, American, United, you make all this money, but you got to commute. And I know there's a lot of people out there that go, man, commuting, it's not that bad. But for me, even if I was based, say, in Minneapolis, it's a one leg on a regional airliner to get down there. I don't want to go there, fly a 3 day trip, and then maybe get stuck there, have to spend the night only to commute the next day. So,
Sure.
not wanting to do that and wanting to live in Minot, North Dakota, which I love it here. Many people don't because of the winters. Um, my options were a little bit limited. So, while I was actually up in Alaska with the King Air, uh, I saw all these big cargo planes coming in. I was like, well, gee, I wonder who that is. And it says Atlas Air on the side. And I've been in aviation for 6, 7 years at that point. Never heard of Atlas Air. And hey, they're flying 747s. That's pretty cool. So my buddy and I, we were sitting in the Anchorage airport just Googling everything we could about Atlas Air. Like, I wonder who they are and how much money the pilots make. And is this a lifestyle that I could do? And well, long story short, about 6 months later, I ended up quitting my King Air job, and I had accepted a 777 job with Atlas Air. Atlas we're not a bad company. It's definitely not the Delta, the main line. It's not FedEx, it's not UPS. So it's not the glamorous cargo jobs. It's not the most glamorous airline out there, but they offer something that I hold really dear, and that's quality of life. And I think a lot of people might laugh when I say that, but I think this is an important thing in aviation when people are deciding what to do is something that works for me, in my scenario, may not work for you, or maybe there is a better option for you. So don't believe everything that somebody says, and don't just think if you're brand new in aviation, don't go talk to that Delta pilot and listen to him talk and him tell you this is the way I did it, and so you have to do it this way. I dislike it when people say that, and I want people to know that that's not their only option. And just because that is what worked for that person, it doesn't mean it's going to work for you. So when I say I went to Atlas, and like I said, I might get laughed at, made fun of because of I say that we're not that bad of a company, and I go to Atlas for the quality of life. If any Atlas employee listens to me say that, they may laugh in my face. But you know what? It works for me because of a couple reasons. One, I live in Minot, North Dakota. The commute is paid for. We have what we call gateway travel. So they buy us an airline ticket to go to and from our base, or depending on the schedule I bid, if I can bid a schedule that starts with a deadhead, let's say I deadhead to Incheon, South Korea. I might end up on I will end up on Delta leaving my home, but then I might end up on a company airplane to get over there, or per our contract, they have to buy us a business class ticket if we go international.
Mm-hmm.
So I could end up on a United business class, lay flat bed over to basically Seoul, South Korea, which, hey, that's not so bad, right? But the biggest deal there is they paid for the ticket. It means I'm not running to the gate, talking to the gate agent, trying to get on the jump seat and fighting maybe there's a Delta pilot who lives in town, right? Well, he gets priority over me on the jump seat. So there's always this stress level if you work for another airline and you're having to jump seat to work. Where at Atlas, I show up, I wave my little ticket that the company paid for, and oftentimes because of how much I fly the airline, I'm a Diamond Delta member, so I get upgraded to first class automatically, especially on these local regional flights. So I'm sitting in first class and going to work, albeit on a day off, but it's nice because I commute once the beginning of my days on, and I commute once at the end of my days on. There is no 3-day trip and having to commute on either side of it, and then come home, and rinse and repeat right a day later or 3 days later. I can go to work they can work us up to 17 days, which is the bad thing in a month. But I've only been there for 2.5 years now, and I can hold what we call a primary line where where I can fly 8 days a month and have 22 days off. Now, from a pay standpoint, that's not great because I'm on min guarantee. But for me, I have a side hustle, which we'll talk about here in a second. So it works great for me. I get to scratch my big airplane itch. I get to live where I want to live. The pay may not be the highest, but you know what? That's okay with me. My quality of life is pretty high. I'm flying a big airplane for 8 days, and I get to come home and do my other passion, which is fly the little airplanes for the rest of the month. And I don't have a family yet, but I got a serious girlfriend, and being home, I guess, is becoming more important to me. And so that's where I like the quality of life aspect there.
Yeah, when I talked with Colton, he was kind of in the same mindset, which I'm sure you guys had talked about it too, especially when he was working with the company I'm at now, because he got to be home every night. And that's what was so big for him at that time. I was in the airplane with him when he hit 1,500 hours. And like I told him when I did the podcast with him, I thought he was just going to evaporate out of the airplane. And, they just magically end up at a major carrier at that point. But, he had that same mindset of like, I don't want to commute. I don't want to be away from, at that time, his girlfriend, I guess now his wife. And the quality of life thing is just so big for a lot of people that I don't think when you're young and you're thinking about getting into aviation, you really consider that. Because it's true. You're going to spend a lot, excuse me, a lot of time away from home, no matter what you do in aviation to start out, generally speaking, as you're trying to find jobs and build hours. But do you want to end up in a 30, 40-year career where, you're away from home half the month, almost guaranteed.
Yeah, and I don't mean to talk poorly about the fractional jet ownership shares or the pilots of fly for them, like NetJets and FlexJet. But one of my big reasons I didn't go to them is because they have these 15 on, 15 off, or an 8 on, 6 off, or a 7 on, 7 off. Unlike the airline, at Atlas, I'm already working 8 days a month, 22 days off. At those fractional jet ownership companies, that's all you get. You get to
Hmm.
do 7 on, 7 off the rest of your career. So you're working 14 days a month, whereas me, I don't, and I don't want to. I mean, I'll say it first. I guess call me lazy, but I get to be home and I get to be happy. So
Very cool. Well, that's a really quick path from what I've seen to get on a big jet like that. Do you think, I guess, if someone wants to end up, because wide body slots I've heard are hard to come by at the major airlines, Delta, American, all that. Obviously, they don't fly that many, comparatively speaking. Do you think if someone was eventually trying to get to a wide body at a major carrier like that, do you think going that cargo path and then kind of sidestepping at that point is something, or is seniority just so important you want to get into Delta or American as quickly as you can?
if you're going to go to one of the big three, as I call it, or maybe even FedEx or UPS, seniority is ultimately the most important thing. If you have one goal and that's to fly a 747, there's only a couple of companies left flying them in the world. We do get a lot of people at Atlas that say, "Man, I really just wanted to fly the Queen of the Skies, so that's why I'm here."
Yeah,
And
not many years left to do that.
it's going to be around for a long time. We took delivery of the very last 747-8 off the production line back in was it 23? I don't remember, but I've actually gotten a ride on that airplane, the last production 747-8. Brand new airplane. It still smelled new inside, I guess.
Yeah,
um, so I guess we got a lot of people that want to come to us and fly them just for that reason, but that wasn't my prerogative. I think if you're trying to get into the wide body flying in general, just go straight to the majors. Well, I mean, you have to go to a regional. I mean, even with Atlas, we had a couple guys that were in my class that did come. I call it straight from the streets, but straight from like twin Cessnas or Caravans or kind of that real entry level professional flying airplane, I guess. A couple of them struggled in our training because of it. They didn't have any. Not that a King Air is overly fast, but some of them had never flown an arrival procedure or a instrument departure out of a big airport before, and now you're doing it at 320 knots, climbing at 6,000 feet a minute in an empty wide body jet. So some of them struggled. So even for us at Atlas, there was a period where you could come to us like a regional airline almost and get your ATP. Atlas was paying for it. I don't think we're doing that anymore. Obviously, the industry is starting to shift. We went from that really hot pilot market to now you might want to just settle down and be happy where you're at for a little bit. You're not going to see a lot of movement maybe over the next couple of years.
right.
So I would still say if the opportunity is there to go to the major and that's where you want to end up, just go there. But if the market can, I guess, sustain it, then come fly 747 for a couple of years and then go to the majors. Supposedly at Atlas, I hear a lot of rumors that United and Delta love our training department because I guess we have one of the hardest training departments in the airline industry. I don't know if there's any truth to that. I didn't feel like, not to, I guess, brag, but I didn't particularly feel like it was overly difficult. I mean, you still had to show up and be committed every single day. And I had a really good somebody, so we studied every single day, and both of us passed every checking event. I wouldn't say with ease. I definitely had a couple of hiccups on my type ride, but they were debrief items. They weren't hard stop fail items. So, but yeah, I guess Delta and United they'll hire our guys for in a heartbeat. So
Yeah. Yeah, so you mentioned it, but with the softening of the market for pilots right now, you're seeing that on the freight side as well.
so yeah, and part of it with Atlas is we just restructured the company a little bit. We got out of our DHL contract for the most part. When we got out of we got rid of most of our 767s that were flying on the Amazon Prime, and we're phasing out all the 737s that were flying prime as well. So the 7.3s, I think, are all going to Sun Country, which if you track the lines back to who owns us, Apollo is I don't know if they're an equity group, I guess you would call it. They own us, but they also own a share in Sun Country, I think. Maybe they sold it, but they did at one point. So they're taking our 7.3s, giving them to Sun Country. And then I think it was like 37 67s that were all flying Amazon cargo are already gone from us. And I think they went to Abex or somebody. So due to our restructuring, we're not hiring because of that, not necessarily because of the state of the market. But I do think even once we do start saying opening up the hiring window again, I think it's going to be very slow. We've already seen at Atlas the last 12 months a reduced number of people moving on to another company. Whereas the year before, which is my first year at Atlas, I think we had almost like 360 pilots quit Atlas, and presumably to go to somebody else. And I think this year in 2025 year to date, I'd have to look for sure, but I think we've had less than 50. So obviously a lot more people 24 months ago compared to now, which I do think would tell you the state of the market a little bit. Probably more than anything, actually, seeing where the movement's at or lack of it.
So as far as like ratings and all that go, you mentioned that Atlas at one point paid for ATPs coming in. It seems like they're taking more green individuals than the regionals and the airlines typically would, even low cost carriers. So ATP required to fly for them. Yeah.
So that was yes now, before no. Well, I shouldn't say no, because yes, to fly the 121 world now you do need an ATP. But prior to us, I want to say lose the Amazon contract, we voluntarily gave that up, or upper management did. Prior to doing that, you could come fly the domestic routes, which is all the 737 flew, with a restricted ATP.
Okay.
Same as what the regionals were doing, except now you're doing it in a 737. So we were taking quite a few people and doing that. Now that we're only flying international freight, wide-body stuff, you are required to have a full-fledged ATP. So we're not going to be hiring as green of people as we were. We did see quite a bit of that, where we were getting 1,500-hour guys or 1,200-hour guys, putting them on the right seat of a 737. They'd run through, get 1,000 hours in that, and then they'd come to the wide-body fleet. Me, when I got hired, I obviously had, I don't want to say a ton of international experience, because the Europe trip while it was fun in the King Air, it wasn't like true international jet experience. But I will say I had a little bit of jet experience, and I did put that on my resume. They certainly asked me about it in the interview. But the 2,000 hours of turbine PIC time, single pilot time in the King Air, is really what ultimately allowed me to go straight to the 777 versus getting onto a smaller jet to begin with. And King Air to 777 it is a big jump.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot of things that my sim buddy had to explain to me that I just was unaware of, because I'd never flown a jet. My sim partner was he flew for, who the heck did he fly for? He was flying for, I think, a subsidiary of Qantas down in Australia. He was actually Australian.
Interesting. Okay.
And he was flying a Embraer 175 and Airbus 330. So he did have some heavy jet time and some prior captain time at an airline. So he was really able to help me through some of the wide body or intro to wide body stuff at Atlas. And I think if you didn't have that at Atlas, you could still make it, but it would probably make that transition even more difficult.
Yeah.
It's coming from a King Air, I guess.
So flying a wide body, you didn't have prior jet experience, but from what you've heard and what you've seen, is that just inherently more difficult than flying a narrow body, especially starting out? Are there,
It's quite the opposite, actually.
Much easier?
Yeah, if you look at the 777, I always tell people, look at our overhead panel and look how simplistic it is in comparison to, say, a 737. I'm not going to say at Airbus, because Airbus they're very, very automated, just like us in the triple. Just take starting an engine, for example, compare it between the triple and like a 737. The triple, the captain will say, okay, let's start the right engine. We reach up, I click start. As soon as I do that, he reaches down, puts the fuel control lever to the start position or to the on position. And then we just sit there and talk about where we're going to go for dinner. Not really, we actually do pay attention, but the computer takes it, and
Yeah,
it has 3 attempts to start the engine. And every attempt it'll do something else, but it's all automated. Some of our older tail numbers, all we have to watch for is the oil pressure. And if the oil pressure doesn't come up, well, guess what? We got to abort the start. And fuel selector off. That's it. 737, they got to reconfigure where the air is going. They got to reconfigure where the electricity is going. They got to manually introduce the fuel. And I think the FO does all that. And I may not have all that correct because I'm not rated on a 737, but have some friends that are. And when we compare our notes, it's like you down here have to be an engineer to fly a 737 compared to the
sure.
triple. You can uh, walk in and know how to run a smartphone and be able to fly it. And a lot of our procedures that we do in the 777 compared to some of the domestic flying is real easy. Just up until recently, the domestic guys didn't have what we call CPDLC, which is controller pilot data link, which is like texting in the airplane. So we could text the air traffic controllers. And I wouldn't say it's required to go across the ocean, but it makes our life a lot easier so we don't have to listen to the HF. And well, actually, there's a few things I said incorrect there, so some guys will catch me on that. But for the basic listener, basically we prefer to text the controllers, and we have HF as a backup, and then we have cell call, which is we don't have to actually listen to the HF. They'll just ding dong, and then we have to put the headset on and actually call them on the HF. But we prefer texting, so texting is a lot easier, obviously, than picking up the radio, even though talking on the radios domestically is not that difficult. But that's just one of the ways where our job is a lot easier than the domestic guys. We're not sitting there on a headset the whole time. A lot of times, guys don't even wear headsets. They'll wear the headset up to 18,000 feet, which is our legal requirement. And after that, they take the shoulder harnesses off, they take the headsets off, and they go change into their pajamas and slippers and settle in for the
Well,
flight.
I know a couple guys that their first ride at a major was a wide body. So I think from a layman's perspective, you're kind of like, this is your first job doing this. And, obviously they flew ERJs, CRJs at the regionals, but then they get to, United proper. And it's like, okay, you're on the triple. And I think just intuitively, that's almost like, wow, that would be such a complicated and difficult thing to do. But sounds like, pretty easy transition to make if you're accustomed to jets at all.
The big jets are a lot easier to land. 777 we're fly by wire. There are no control cables except to a couple of the manual backups. And basically, you come down at, depends on your weight, but once you hear that radar altimeter call out 30, just relax your control stick a little bit, let it come back as kind of like a round out. And then at when it calls out 20, just flare. Just not like a 172, but just give her a just nice little flare. All that fly by wire stuff is very sensitive. And you should be able to grease it on pretty much every single time. But people, including myself, have actually screwed it up uh, once or twice.
You do it enough, it happens.
Yeah, well, when I was on my IOE, so my initial operating experience with the line check guy, we were landing in Incheon, and there's 4 pilots on our jet a lot of the times. And the guy sitting in the first jump seat straight behind the center console, he did not secure his iPad for my landing, and my landing was less than stellar. Kind of pounded it on, tried to throw the struts through the wings, and his iPad came forward and hit the throttle quadrant, and it
Oh, no.
like broke the whole screen. And every once in a
Oh,
while, I see him
geez.
on the line still, and he still reminds me. Well, he thanks me because he got a new iPad out of it from the company. So
So flying overseas, it sounds like South Korea is a pretty common location for you from the couple stories you told.
it
How
was for a long time, but now we're shifting more to China operations.
yeah, how does that differ, the overseas flying, differ from what you have experienced in the US?
Now that I've done it, you can always tell on the radio an international pilot compared to a domestic guy. One of the little differences is like, let's say our call sign is at Atlas, we're Giant. So we're Giant. International guys will say Giant 8655, whereas your domestic guys would say Giant 8655.
Hmm.
They don't know 8655 over there. The controllers know the number 8, they know the number 6, and they know the number 5. So you can't go out and say 8655. You got to say Giant 8655. and you got to
Right.
actually articulate and enunciate your radio calls when you do them, because they don't know the words. They don't know the meaning behind the words like we do over here. My favorite air traffic control in the country or in the world is the United States, but our air traffic control is quite frankly a mess compared to how some of the other countries run it. So that's one of the big differences. It does take a little bit to get used to what they're saying, and it really helps when you understand or when you learn what languages can't say certain phrases or can't enunciate certain letters in the English language, and that'll really help you.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, I think the U.S. controllers and pilots get a lot of flack from other countries for just how slack the phraseology is in the air. I think we get used to abbreviations and non sequiturs that we think sound cool sometimes and just aren't the proper phraseology. So going overseas, I could see how that could cause a lot of confusion. I don't think anybody over there is saying fish finder and in the box and all that stuff we've gotten used to here.
No, no, nobody actually says that stuff. And even in the US, when I do hear it, or if I'm flying with somebody who says it, I do actually point them as a representative of the FAA when I conduct the practical exams. I'm like, hey, look, that is not allowed. Do not say that. You're still a professional at the end of the day. You want to sound professional, and you are representing, in this case, our airline Atlas. One, set a good example for everybody else, but make the company look good. That's kind of what we're out there doing too. So
One thing, and then I do want to get into the DPE role because that's the one that I think I probably have the most questions about. But
yeah, most people do.
yeah, yeah, especially coming from the flying side, you're kind of that in between point between the flying public and the FAA, that interface that is a spot I don't envy people being in sometimes. But one more thing on the cargo flying, do you see a lot of guys that are pilots professionally that have that same passion in aviation? You talked about you own airplanes and you like to take the time to fly yourself just for fun. And what's that split between people that just grew up with a passion for aviation, they love it outside of work, and the people that are just there for the career, just there for the paycheck?
Learning to fly in Minot, where aviation is a passion for 99% of the people that show up to the airport. It was a rude awakening, I think, because I figured all these captains, they're making $350,000 a year. I'm like, man, what kind of airplane do you have, right? Like, you must have like this really cool aerobatic airplane sitting in the hangar, or maybe you have a twin engine, maybe you got a Baron, and it's just got this brand new Garmin panel in it. Like, you guys must be living life, right? And it's quite the opposite, actually. I think I can count on maybe more than one hand, maybe two hands, how many people I've flown with in over my 2 years at Atlas now that actually own airplanes. It's a very small number. Most people that I've run into, especially on the captain side, they look at flying the jet as a job. And I don't know if that's just due to their age and they've just gotten worn out with it, um, or what it is, I guess. But it's it's that's a really good question. Actually, I was just talking about somebody about that same thing this morning. But it's for me, it was shocking, just really shocking. And I don't know, maybe shocking and maybe a little disappointing too, because they didn't they do their job well and they know the airplane really well. But like, you bring up just simple GA airplanes like Mooney. Like, I own a Mooney, right? And what does everybody know about the Mooney? Everybody knows the Mooney, their tail is the opposite direction, right? Their tail points forward.
Right,
And there's a
right.
lot of people out there that's like, oh, what's a Mooney? No, I've never heard of it. And I'm like, you guys are flying a 777. Like, how don't you know what this is? But over time, I realized like that is actually the norm.
Well, let's get into the DPE side. Maybe just talk about what a DPE is and what you do.
Sure. So DPE, designated pilot examiner. We don't. Well, I guess what we do is we give the check rides. We give that practical test. So the ground portion and then the flight test, in order for you to become a private pilot, a instrument rated pilot, or any sort of a rating or pilot certificate in the U.S. We don't work for the FAA. I want to make that clear. For me, I work for myself. I represent the administrator of the FAA on or during that practical test. And in the position, I guess you never really leave. Again, kind of coming back to that professionalism, you never leave that professionalism. Once you are a DP, whether I'm flying my own airplane for pleasure and I walk into the FBO in Bismarck, everybody knows you're the DPE, right? So you still have to maintain that professionalism about you, even when you're out and about. So mind your P's and Q's in that position as it is. Um, so primarily what I do is I conduct these check rides, and that's what ultimately allows you to get a pilot's license or that rating. Getting into becoming an examiner is I don't want to use the words difficult, but unfortunately it can be difficult depending where you live because it depends on a couple factors. One is the FAA has to manage you. So they have to have the manpower to assign you a managing specialist, and there has to be a need for you. Now, many people are probably listening to this right now and going, well, there's a need everywhere for examiners. Well, now we get back to that whole managing side of it. The FAA, amidst all these the budget cuts, I won't say whether I'm for or against them, but there are budget cuts out there going on in the government, and I think we're going to see some of that right now as well. But I also think we talked about the downturn in the pilot hiring a little bit, so I think we'll see that catch up with the examiner side of it too. Where right now I'm really busy. I think in a couple of years, I don't think I'll probably only be doing 60% of the check rides annually that I do now.
What made you decide that you wanted to become one?
Uh, it's a question I get a lot, but really nothing. There was a need in our area. The gentleman had been doing it forever down in Bismarck, retired, and he had been gone for a couple years, and I was still flight instructing a little bit. And we were talking to the FAA saying, hey guys, we really need an examiner here. We need to do something about this. Like we're tired of flying 2 hours on a 172 to Fargo or Thief River Falls and doing a check ride over there. Like nothing against the examiners over there, but rarely can you get the weather system in Minot to line up with the weather system in Fargo.
Mm-hmm.
And even though we're 200 nautical miles apart, we're always on two different weather systems, or maybe it's a nice day in both cities, but now it's blowing 30 knots in one city, and you just can't be sending a private pilot applicant out in that sort of weather. So we finally petitioned the FAA. They finally started talking about getting one. They were talking to all the experienced guys in Minot and Bismarck and trying to find one. And kind of what I gathered was nobody was really biting on it. Nobody really wanted to do that job. So I went over to my mentor in aviation, who's here in Minot, and I just asked him straight up. I said, I've got, at the time, I think it was about 4,000 hours of flight time. I had, 1,500 hours in a King Air and 1,000 hours of tailwheel time. I'd flown a bunch of different aerobatic airplanes. Not going to say I was any good at it, but I did own a couple aerobatic airplanes and taught myself and got some instruction from the ground until I bought the 2-seat airplane. Then I got some dual flying some aerobatics, which I think that was really what set me up well for being an examiner and really learning the envelope of the airplanes. I think you have to have that knowledge of the envelope of the aircraft to become an examiner, let people really take it to the edge, and not touch the controls and be comfortable with that in a way. So after all these guys didn't want the job, and I approached my mentor, I said, hey, can I do this? Do you think I can? Is it smart? Like, give me your opinion here. And he said, yeah, I give it a shot. So I got on the horn with the FAA and I said, hey, this is who I am. This is where I live. This is my experience. I'd really love the position, take it or leave it. And uh, at the time I was only 22 and they said, well, you got to be 23. I learned that there's an age limit on becoming a pilot examiner, which now I'm 27 now, and I've been an examiner for closing in on 4 years. I think there's good reason. So the day I turned 23, the FAA knew it was coming. I sent in my application, and I think they interviewed me within the next week or something. There was two different FAA inspectors on the interview call. They told me it was going to take like 3 hours or something. And I'm, wearing a suit and tie, and I'm really prepared for this thing. And I'm like, oh man, this is going to be like the hardest oral I've ever done. I really have no idea what to expect. And like, what do you study for? Like here's the ACS and PTSs, and here's the authorizations that I'm gunning for them to give me. Like, they're going to ask me whatever they want to ask me. No, they pretty much asked me, who I was, what my goals and aspirations were, why I wanted to become an examiner. And they gave me a couple scenarios on like, hey, would you fail this person, or is this a discontinuance, or what is this and what is that? And both of them took turns asking me questions for about 30 minutes, and then we were done. I was like, okay,
Wow.
that's actually easier than my airline interview.
Yeah.
I don't think it's going to be that way everywhere. I think I definitely had helped that I had met one of the inspectors in person, and there was maybe a person to person interview conducted prior to that too. So I think that maybe helped. But they really liked the fact that I wanted to live in Minot and I wasn't going to leave Minot, and that I was actively flying in the general aviation world. It's not like I was just flying a 777, got 30,000 hours of flight time, haven't touched a piston powered airplane in the last 20,000 hours. They really enjoyed that. Hey, I was active in the community and I was current and proficient in not only just a 172, but hey, I could fly all these other aircraft.
Sure.
So that's what ultimately led to me becoming an examiner. I guess you have any questions on that process or?
No, I mean it obviously for those not familiar, Minot, North Dakota in general, super sparsely populated. So, it's I grew up on the East Coast. I live on the East Coast now, and even my town I grew up in was small, but you're not that far away from anything. You can be to a city in 30 minutes. But what surprised me the most, probably when I lived in North Dakota, it's like you have Minot, but there was so much stuff in Minot, shopping, restaurants, movie theaters, all that stuff that I wouldn't expect for a town of that size. But then I realized, well, that's because everyone within 3 hours goes to Minot because there's nowhere else to go. So I can imagine the need to have an examiner there because, like you were saying, if you're trying to go to Fargo, if you're trying to go to Grand Forks, if you're trying to go, I don't know if there's one in Williston, but you're trying to go out there, like that is a long, long journey to do a check ride.
It is, and um, to the point of everyone having to come to me, I'm way busier now than I ever anticipated I would be with the examiner gig. I was budgeting 60 check rides a year, and I think we're on just past the first quarter of the year, almost done with April here, and I'm on about 100 already.
Wow.
Now, full disclosure, that's not just mine at North Dakota. I think it was back in 2019, the FAA took away the geographical boundaries that the examiners had to basically live in. They were limited to they couldn't go outside of it without permission from at least their FSDO, if not the FSDO Flight Standards District Office, is what FSDO stands for,
Mm.
um, wherever you were going to go conduct the check rides at. But since they removed that limitation on us, I do travel all over the country giving check rides, especially in the winter. January and February in North Dakota, it's typically we have 2 to 4 weeks where oftentimes the temperature won't get much above zero. Well, it's not really practical and it's not really safe to be flying a single engine piston airplane, out there doing touch and goes.
Right.
It's hard on your body, it's hard on the equipment, so we just don't do it. So that time of year, I do get out, and this year I've been down to Denver, I've been down to Atlanta, I've been down to San Antonio to do check rides, and it's fun. I get to fly my Mooney down there. Some of the flight schools they reimburse me the cost for the just fuel of my Mooney to get to and from their schools, and they give me a bunch of check rides, and it's pretty good business.
Yeah, smart of them to remove the boundaries too, because like we talked about, there's already enough restrictions at the government level, especially in the FAA. They're just so short-staffed in every capacity, really. To We see waits for everything, for check rides, for maintenance on aircraft, and all that stuff. And so, if you're geographically constrained, that just makes that problem that much worse. So, good on them for at least taking the steps to open that up a little bit. I did want to get into what you see from the people you check out. Doing 100 at this point in the year, and having done it for 4 years, you're probably close to 400 or 500 students that you've checked off, if not more. Um, what do you see as the common mistakes? I guess let's go at each level. So private, instrument, commercial. What are you seeing as the biggest issues at each step, and what do people need to focus on more if they're trying to get checked off?
Yeah, so I'll start off with I'm allowed to give check rides for private instrument, commercial, CFII, an MEI, so multi-engine instructor. I cannot do the initial CFI check rides yet. There's a probation period on brand new DPs that you have to wait out. I'm beyond that point in time already, but and I'm getting the authorization to do the initial CFI rides. I just don't have that yet. So of the check rides I can do, we'll start private level. I think it's just the basics, right? People don't they lack the PIC authority. They get in the aircraft, they're very timid, they're very shy, and I think that affects their overall performance. The private level, I see a lot of crosswinds. They don't correct for the crosswind very well, and I think you're getting these brand new flight instructors, and I think this is a negative effect of where we've seen rapid or too rapid of movement from the flight instructor ranks. You know, you hit that 1,500 hours and you go straight to the airlines. Or if you went to that 141 program, I think it's 1,000 hours or 1,200 or something like that. You can go straight to these regional airlines. So you have no depth in the flight instructor ranks anymore. So you have no real experienced instructor to pass that knowledge, good crosswind techniques down to the newer instructors and on to the students. I would say the landings are a very big issue in the private level, along with just not really being that captain, being that PIC. And a lot of that just comes with time. I mean, a lot of them have 40 to 60 hours in the airplane total. So that's the primary reason behind that. Onto the instrument side of things, you see a lot of procedural errors, simple things like not knowing how to use your avionics. Everybody knows the procedures, everybody knows how to shoot an ILS, right? That's not where we see a lot of issues. It's, hey, we get into the airplane. I want to stay in the holding pattern. What do I have to do? Well, we have to press this button that us DPEs call the $900 button. We call it the $900 button because if you don't press it, you're going to be spending another $900 to come back to do another check ride. And that button either suspends or unsuspends the sequencing of the waypoints in the GPS to either A, keep you in the hold, or B, sequence that approach on onto the next fix so you can shoot the approach. Well, if you don't hit it and you wanted to stay in the hold, well, now you have no guidance for your inbound leg for the holding pattern. And if you don't hit it to exit the hold, well, now you just tried to shoot an instrument approach with no guidance. So that's probably one of the biggest ticket items that we see. The stick and rudder scales on the instruments, people are pretty good at just maintaining the needles and stuff. That's honestly the big one.
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen some goofy things over the years, but nothing more than that.
Yeah. For private, it makes me think about, you mentioned how quickly instructors are cycling through. And I saw that even in my time training. I did my private training. I started in 2012. I didn't finish until like 2016, just sporadically flew. But yeah, my instructor in 2012, I only did like, 10 hours with this guy, but he was probably 60 something, had been instructing forever. And then, like you said, the 1,500-hour rule went into effect, and people started evaporating from the airplane as soon as they hit it. I went to Embry-Riddle for a little while, trained there, and same deal. It's like these guys are just, as soon as they hit that time threshold, they're gone, and you're on to the next person who you have to learn how they teach, and they have to learn how you fly. I see. I didn't experience it personally, but I do see a lot of instructors almost over controlling their students. And I wonder if you see that as well, and where that lack of confidence comes in at the solo level and at the check ride level, where they're used to just getting in the airplane, holding the controls, and instructor says, do this, now do this, now do this. And they're just a monkey following directions.
I see a ton of that. I even had one gentleman show up for a check ride, and we had completed the check ride. It was a private pod check ride. We were getting out of the aircraft, and the line techs at the FBO had marshaled us in. We get out of the aircraft, and they asked the gentleman, "Hey, would you like fuel?" And he goes, "I don't know. I have to talk to my instructor." I said, "Whoa, whoa, whoa! Wait a minute here. You know where you're going, right? Like you got to go from here back to wherever home was." And I said, "You're the PIC dude. You just passed your private pod check ride. Like, make a decision. What is your instructor going to tell you? That A, we need gas?" I said, "How much gas do we have?" and I don't remember the exact numbers, but it was, I think they had flown in, they did not get gas. We had flown the check ride. It was in a 172, so most 172s hold 38 to 40 gallons. Uh, it was obvious to me that they were going to need gas to
Mm-hmm.
make the flight back home safely and legally. And this guy wanted to talk to his instructor. So I think the point you make is a great one, and I do see it all the time.
Even accelerated programs. I talked with Colton a little about this too. With the big pilot boom, you saw the ATPs and some of these other schools offering, become a commercial pilot in 9 months or 6 months or whatever. They make these promises and they just try to shove students through as quickly as they can because that's how they're making their money. And some 141s aren't that way. You have UND, you have Embry-Riddle, and for all their drawbacks, they don't really shove students through as quickly. But with Part 61 operators, I think 141s try to differentiate themselves from 61s by saying, we have this really high quality program and it's under all these regulations, and you're going to get the best flight education that you can possibly get doing our program. When the student gets to the check ride portion, what do you see as the difference in their preparedness coming from a 141 versus a 61?
To sum it up in only a couple words, the Part 61 guys can typically fly, and the Part 141s, they know how to talk their way through an oral. Um, I think you see a little more experience coming from the Part 61 instructors. It's not so cookie cutter. It's not so, this is the way. This is the way that we've always done it. So this is the way you're going to do it. Here's the mold. Don't color outside the lines, and you're going to get by just fine. That's what they teach at those big schools. Even when I go do check rides for some of these big schools, I do a little bit 141 check rides and do some check rides for ATP. That's oftentimes what I see with them is they zoom through the oral because they do a great job. They don't miss anything like some of the Part 61 guys do. But then we get to the flying portion, and they definitely are. Those guys really can't make a decision because their instructor really has held their hand. Maybe even on top of the FARs, you see these big schools, they have their own rules. Like even on, for example, on the multi-engine check rides, some of the schools I go to, they have a 4,000 foot AGL hard deck, whereas the FAA is 3,000. And you ask them in an oral or even out, like when we're out flying, like, hey, what altitude are we going to go to? And we're already at a legal altitude. And they're like, oh, we can't do it here.
Hmm.
And I'm like, okay, you got to understand something today. Like, I am not the CEO of your company. Like, I'm not your flight checks guy. I'm representing the FAA, and I have a book that I have to follow. Like, you have to differentiate between your school rules and the FAA rules.
What I've seen is the insurance companies start to really limit what they're allowing some of these flight schools to do too. And I saw that even back when I was at Embry-Riddle. It was like the year I started my flight training there, they had just stopped allowing them to go train at a grass strip. And it's like, how are you going to practice off-field landings if you can't even ever do one while you're there? So it's a shame that they're limiting, I think, how quality pilots can be because they're not allowing them to do things because they're slightly riskier or too risky for insurance or the school's perception of what it should be.
That's the current day mentality. Risk is bad. I mean, we've tried to wrap everything in bubble wrap these days, and kids don't even go outside and scrape their knees anymore. So
Yeah, it's a shame. Something that I was not expecting when you sent me your synopsis. You and Tom Cruise share something in common. You've both flown a P-51 Mustang. You want to
yeah.
tell me about that?
Mr. Cruz owns one. That is not something I can say I have. They run anywhere from two to, I don't know, maybe as high as $6 million. Um, I don't think I'll ever own one, unfortunately, as much as I'd love to. Um, so to talk about the Warbird side of it, I got involved. Um, I guess I'll back up. My mentor in aviation, gentleman here in Minot, he's a longtime air show and lifetime air show guy. Has runs in his family. He's started a museum here, the Dakota Territory Air Museum, and over the years, that's really morphed into. We have a really epic antique side of the museum, and some of the airplanes still fly on that side of it. But then back in the early 2000s, there was a gentleman in North Dakota who bought a Warbird, a P-51, and started getting people checked out in it. And my mentor, they had previously restored a TBM. So that in combination with that Mustang, it turned into two private gentlemen buying an entire fleet of Warbirds, and they ended up air showing them all over the country for many years. And so when I started learning how to fly in Minot, I went to this guy and I said, "Hey, look, what you guys are doing is really cool. I'd love to fly a P-51 someday. Like that's like my dream, right?" And I've really geared my career around it, which is one of the big reasons why I didn't want to move away from Minot. Was to really chase this passion, this dream of flying these warbirds. And the first thing he told me was, "Hey, go buy a Luscombe." I'm like, "Why?" And he goes, "Because you need a bunch of tailwheel time. No one's going to let you use their airplane because tailwheel is inherently more risky, right, than flying a
Sure.
tricycle gear airplane."
Yeah.
And Aluscum, people think they're squirrely, and they really teach you. They really teach you a lot. They teach you how to fly a crosswind, but they're a lot better. I'm gonna get some hate for this, but they're a lot better than a Champ. They're a lot better than a Cub. They're all metal. You can leave them outside. They're not going to get hurt. And I'll tell you what, I wouldn't blink once if I needed to take a Luscombe in 30 knots of wind. But holy, would I be puckered if I had to take a Cub in 30 knots of wind.
Mm-hmm.
Cubs they just won't handle it as well. So I went out, I bought this Luscombe, and at the age of 19, $22,000, I think is what I paid for this thing. It's got a 90 horsepower engine in it. And I flew this thing from coast to coast, north to south with my buddy. He had a 150. We kind of flew some formation and thought we were like the bee's knees, like we're the next greatest air show act coming up. This Luscombe in a 150 flying formation, guy can dream a little bit.
Yeah.
But so we had a lot of fun times doing that stuff. But that's really what kickstarted me getting into the Warbird stuff. So I went out, bought this airplane, got a bunch of time in it, started volunteering at the museum, just being around, not in the way, but just being a face, being available. Like we got a little gate we have to open up to let the airplanes taxi in and out of. You ended up being the guy that opens the gate, right? You end up being the guy that when the planes get back, you end up washing the bugs and the oil and all the smudge off of them, and so the pilots can go out and enjoy their lives. So making the pilot's life easier, at your sacrifice of time, I guess. And then eventually one day they're standing around cleaning an airplane. They were going to go fly say a T6, but we have Harvards here, which are the Canadian version of a T6.
Mm.
And one day they're like, "Yeah, let's go. What are you doing? Let's get in the Harvard. Let's go fly." So one day after all this tailwheel time and I got some aerobatic time and just got thrown in the front seat of a Harvard and went flying for a little bit, which eventually led to a checkout in the Harvard and started soloing that. Got a bunch of hours in that airplane, which by the way, it burns 30 gallons an hour. And you guys can do the math on, we always tell people 100 hours before you can even think about flying a Mustang. Some guys, I think the CAF might even say 200 or 250 hours in a T6 before they
Jeez.
let you do it. I don't know. But it's a ton of time. It's a large financial investment into it. But all said and done, at the end of the day, same thing. One day they're like, "Well, we think you're ready. So here's a Mustang. Why don't you get in it?" And I had my longtime aviation mentor sit in the back seat. He had a stick and he had a throttle and two little pegs for rudders. So he's really not going to save anything with that. But it's enough to at least sit in the airplane and talk a guy through something. And we went out and flew some basic maneuvers. I guess went out, did some steep turns, did some stalls, did some accelerated stalls. Then we went out and did a little bit of aerobatics in it, I guess. That was the fun part, right?
Yeah.
Kind of learn what the airplane's going to do, how it's going to kill you, and how not to kill yourself in it. A lot of things, or one thing that people, I guess, maybe don't realize, or I didn't realize about a Mustang is like, hey, this thing can weigh anywhere from 8 to 10,000 pounds,
Mm.
and it's not your Cub, it's not your Citabria, it's not your little Champ that you're rocking around. You can mess up a little bit and really get it back. It's got a lot of momentum. It's got a lot of mass. It's got a big propeller out front. You get all these, big thing out there, P factor and torque that you feel the effect in a small airplane, but you really don't appreciate it until you get into an airplane as serious as this. So learning all that stuff was really cool, and I will rat on myself a little bit. The first two landings I had were definitely not the prettiest. And then we had a maintenance issue. We stopped and went back out in the pattern for a couple more landings, and I got soloed in it. So
Very cool.
I think I have 10 hours in a Mustang at most. So it's
It's
still
more
brand
than
new.
yeah, more than 99.9% of pilots out there.
Yeah, well, very thankful for the opportunity, the privilege really to get to do it.
That is, I think, a bucket list item for a lot of people. Did you talked about how, I guess, how powerful it was to have the P factor and the torque affect it so much? Was there anything else that was surprising about the way it handled the controls? Something being that old, obviously, probably more similar to the Luscombe than the Mooney that you fly as well. But
Uh,
anything that stands out?
Actually, the airfoil on the Mooney and a Mustang are the same airfoil. So you just got unlucky with the airplane you
Yeah.
picked to compare it to. No, but North American really designed a really amazing airplane. If you really look at the technology that's in the aircraft for the date, what it did, it was just an amazing airplane. The handling characteristics on it are really, really nice. It's on top of it being the fighter of World War II, the most recognized airplane of that era. It flies surprisingly very, very well. It's very well balanced. It's fast. I think to really answer your question, one of the more surprising characteristics that I think a new pilot would really get themselves in trouble with. Not that a new pilot's going out and flying aerobatics in a P-51, but the accelerated stall characteristics of it. One of the maneuvers that we did was just a basic loop. Go up, pull basically 4Gs, come let off in the top, and then re-engage that 4Gs in the backside of it. Well, the backside, I started pulling a little too hard, a little too quickly. We were still pretty slow, and it's no different than doing a commercial accelerated stall, but I did an accelerated stall right there. It got the real buffet. The airplane really talks well to you.
Mhm.
It's not a surprise, like starts sounding and shaking, and I don't know how to describe it. It's actually really, really noticeable feeling and sound. Um, but on the backside of a loop, if you get yourself in that scenario, it'll just start dropping out from under you, and you really need a lot of altitude to recover from that. Um, so I guess that was one thing that really surprised me was how high the wing loading is on it, and I think it really sneaks up on you. So like you can't go into the pattern, and like if you overshoot the runway like you do in a 172, you can't stand on that inside rudder. Not that you want to in the first place anyway, but you can't stand on that inside rudder and yank and bank it back to the runway. You are going to stall it, and I guarantee you're going to spin it right there. So it's a very say you got to be a professional flying it as well. I think a lot of guys back in the war did get into some pretty horrific landing accidents with it. It's not a hard airplane to fly, which is weird to say. I would say more, the T6 is more difficult to fly than a Mustang is, outside
Mhm.
of the speed and a couple. It's a little more engine management, a little more system heavy. You got to be in tune with what's going on inside as well as outside because things happen really quickly.
Yeah, it makes sense, I guess, from a historical standpoint, because they were just throwing hundreds and thousands of these things in the air with, 18, 19, 20-year-old guys that had 10 hours of flight training.
Yeah.
I got to fly in one of the Collings Foundations, their B-17 that ended up crashing in like 2017. I flew in that a couple years before it crashed, and it made me appreciate just how terrifying that must have been at that time, because they're so simplistic on the inside. It's as thin of aluminum skin as they could get on it, so they could carry as many bombs as they could and put as many guns on that thing as they could. But when they were doing our pre-flight brief, basically you just sat on the floor for takeoff, and then they said, once you get in the air, you can go anywhere you want in the airplane. The only place we couldn't go was the tail gunner's position, because the tail wheel comes up and blocks that tunnel back to the tail gunner position. But everywhere else, there, like, it's free game. You can go anywhere. But there were two rules. One was, if you're going through the bomb bay and you drop a cell phone or something and it lands on the bomb bay door, leave it until we land, because it will hold the weight of the cell phone, but it won't hold your weight. If you fall on it, the bomb bay doors are going to open. And the second thing they told us, they pointed to the ceiling. They said, see all these cables running up and down the ceiling? Said, those are the control cables for the airplane. If you're walking around and you fall, hit the ground, because if you grab one of these cables, you're flying the airplane. So then they start it up, you taxi out, there's a whole bunch of smoke because those things burn about as much oil as they do fuel. And it made me kind of reflect on, imagine being 17, 18 years old. You're probably never been in an airplane, probably never been outside your country. All of a sudden, you're 20,000 feet over Germany, getting shot at, freezing to death in this thing that sounds like it's about to shake itself apart at any moment. Just a whole different era. But very cool experience. Thank you for sharing that one. There's a lot of talk recently about airlines going to single pilot operations. Airbus has been testing a bunch of stuff with that. I think personally, I think it's going to be a very, very long time, if ever, that makes it to passenger airlines. But I think that there's the potential for that to take place in the cargo and freight world. What have you seen of that, and what's your thought and opinion on that?
We really haven't seen anything, but I think I share your viewpoint. It's not going to happen for a long time. Even in the cargo market, I just, well, like, for one, our union won't let it happen. I'm not a big union guy as it is, but I think you're going to have a real big issue with the unions. I mean, some of that we've already seen with the air traffic controllers. That's why they didn't want to go to CPDLC domestically, is because the controller union claimed that, hey, it's going to get rid of jobs, and we don't want that. Um, Even though a lot of the controllers on the floor were saying, no, give us CPDLC because it's really going to make our job a lot easier. And we've seen even more air traffic. And I think anybody who's flown an airplane in IFR at least and tried to get from, say, New York down to Florida during the wintertime, you are facing delays upon delays upon delays uh, because there's a controller shortage down there. Jacksonville can only handle so much traffic. So to get back to your question, I just don't see it happening for the foreseeable future. And I don't, quite frankly, I don't think, I think it will happen. I think even in my career, I think I'm safe. I don't think we're going to go to single pod operations for a long time. And if we do, it's going to be the very end of my career, which I'm 27. So we've got a long time left,
Yeah.
hopefully.
Yeah, and really with all the advancements that we've seen so far is about lightening pilot workload. And you take all that tech that you just spent billions and billions of dollars to develop to lighten the pilot workload, and you immediately double the workload by removing one of the pilots from the cockpit. And so that's the piece of it. I think the tech is there in a lot of cases. You see like the Garmin Auto Land that's going into some of the turboprop aircraft now. Cirrus has it in the Vision Jet. I think Piper did it in the new Mirage. But it's yeah, that's an interesting one for me that I think could possibly shake up that market the most in probably the next 20 years or so. And I wonder, wasn't really that into the industry at that point, but I wonder if we saw the same kind of pushback when they started removing flight engineers from the cockpit. Because to me, it's the same kind of argument, right? Like you're removing another member of the crew from the cockpit and automating so much of this stuff. But just wanted to get your input on that, being from the freight and cargo world. What tips or advice would you have for somebody that's trying to follow your path and get to be a wide body pilot on a cargo aircraft?
Do what works for you. I think I'll just kind of mirror what I said earlier, where don't talk to one person and don't take what that one person says all the way to heart. Just because they said it doesn't mean it's what's going to work for you. I we talked about a lot of stuff today where the differences in UND and Riddle and ATP and versus Part 61 and the pros and some cons of each. And you know what? If you need to take a loan out, well, you have to go 141, and I think that's a-okay. I think if you look at the top of the leaderboard for UPS, FedEx, Delta, American United, Atlas, even. I mean, look at the guys flying for us. It's you got Part 61 guys like me who didn't go to college. You got those guys who went to Riddle. You got those guys who went to ATP. So figure out what works best for you, and don't let anybody tell you that you're doing it wrong.
Good. And then if you had to start over again today, start your flying career again, what would you do differently, if anything?
Man, that's a great question. I've been very fortunate in a lot of things in my career, in a lot of ways that in a lot of the different ways that it did go. I think if it went differently from what it had, I maybe wouldn't have been able to fly a Mustang. I probably wouldn't be a DPE. I think in hindsight here, if I really had to change something, I probably would have scrapped the King Air job and went straight to the regionals. But that's really only, it's not because I didn't enjoy the King Air job. I love the King Air job. I love the King Air. I love the people that I flew for. In fact, I still miss it. And I think part of me saying that I go straight to the regionals would have to be because I never did it. So there's a part of me that misses it because I didn't do it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, little grass is greener.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Um, so this one's a little for me because at some point I want to get back into flying professionally. What advice would you give for somebody who's either starting their career late or getting back into it after a long break?
Advice, I think if you're worried about age, maybe gear yourself towards an ATP. It's going to cost more money, but it's going to get you done a lot quicker. There is no doubt that going to a Part 61 can definitely take you, if you're not real motivated, you're on your own, it can be a while. So I think that's one benefit of a program like ATP is they promise you 9 months. It probably won't be 9 months. It might be closer to a year and a half, but that probably is a lot quicker than you're going to get through in a Part 61 school because you only have yourself to push you. Um, as far as jobs, I guess, again, if you're worried about age, I think maybe don't go to the airlines. I think there's a lot of jobs out there in the corporate industry, especially if you live in an area like Phoenix or a Denver or an Atlanta or anywhere on the East Coast, really. You can probably go find a pretty decent corporate job paying pretty well. The reason I say corporate job is because you don't have to climb a seniority ladder because you may not have that time. But if you do have that time and you do have the dreams to go fly for an airliner, then maybe you do consider a company like Atlas, where even if you have to climb that seniority ladder, you can do it perhaps a little bit quicker than what you could do at a Delta. Maybe you do want to go fly for Delta, but hey, I hate to break it to you, if you're going to go fly on a wide body airplane, you're probably never going to see captain. If you only have 20 years or so left. So that's, I guess, just the hard facts of it. But again, decide for yourself what works best for you.
And then last one is what's the biggest lesson you've learned so far in aviation?
There are a lot. The
We can do top 3.
part of my issue is it's hard to think of them, as weird as that may sound. I'll go with this, I guess. I think for me, being a young guy, um, a young male, is just the maturity behind it. I think every year that I look back and reflect on in aviation, I've learned and experienced so many new things. And I feel like I take something and I try to take something from all those experiences. Here in Minot, I know my mentor always says this, but there's certain things that give you a piece of humble pie. And whether it may be a certain experience or, doesn't always need to involve bending metal but you will. If you're in aviation long enough, you will. And I have. I've learned a lot from those events, obviously, but there's always that saying in aviation, you won't live long enough to make everyone's mistakes. So maybe start learning from everybody. Um, and maybe I think the biggest hurdle it took me as a young guy to get over was the fact that I could learn from everybody. Just because I held a CFI certificate didn't mean that I couldn't learn something from that private pilot. That private pilot probably has a lot of experiences that you don't have, especially if they've been flying for 10,000 hours. So, I'd say be humble and try to learn something from everybody.
Hey, thanks for listening. If you're interested in hearing more from aviation professionals, you can subscribe to the AirPod on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple. That's AERPOD. I'm excited to see you back here on the AirPod.